Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. And in this episode, we're going to look at the outbreak and the origins of the First World War from a Polish perspective. And I'm delighted to have with me in the studio my colleague Adam Starzyński, our expert on all things historical and Polish. Adam, welcome back again.
Thank you.
Good to see you. The First World War was obviously in retrospect, was a key moment because this was the time when Poland, after 123 years of partition, regained its independence in 1918. But of course, that's the end of the story. The beginning of the story is, in fact, the outbreak of the First World War and the opportunities it afforded to Poland.
We often forget about the First World War, both in Poland, but also when the history of the First World War is written and described in other countries. Since Poland wasn't a sovereign state that was with its other peers on the political map of Europe at the time, it is often overlooked. The front really between 1914 and 1918, it continuously progressed through Polish inhabited areas, whether they were close to Warsaw or further east in what is today Belarus and Ukraine, but back then had large Polish populations as well. In many cases, the front would go back and forth many times. There were Polish cities, villages that would see the front pass by more than a dozen times, each time with artillery shelling, bombing, the pillaging and other horrible acts that would take place when any foreign army would pass by. So the material destructions, the destruction in human life, the losses were enormous. Also, the Poles were drafted into all the armies of the participants of the war in this part of Europe. The three partitioning powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Russian Empire, they were all involved in the war, and they were all fighting against each other, and this took place right here. So, for example, you could say that in military losses, Poland suffered more dead in the First World War than they did in the Second. Naturally, in the Second, there were more civilians that were killed, so still the Second World War saw more Polish citizens killed than Poles died in the First World War. But from a strictly military perspective, the First World War was more devastating, with 1.2 million Poles dying in all armies. The war itself, when it started, it was also, you could say that international politics had remained the same in this part of Europe for decades, and it had somehow made the Poles feel that it was very unlikely that anything was about to change in the near future, that there would be some kind of chance. We spoke earlier about in previous episodes about the January uprising, that the Poles had risen up against the Russian Empire in 1863 to 1864. They saw it as their chance to regain sovereignty. But when that didn't happen, the uprising was quelled, and after that there were very strict punishments delivered out to the Poles that had participated, but also many Poles that hadn't participated. This extinguished the will for uprisings, any type of armed struggle for Polish independence for a few good decades. And by 1914, this had slightly changed, but still you could say that a majority of society didn't believe that Polish sovereignty was within reach in any way, shape or form. One of the people that had a different opinion was Józef Piłsudski, this man who had been born in the region of what is today Vilnius, back then known in Poland as Wilno, that was under the Russian Empire. Growing up, he had heard family legends from the January uprising, and he was brought up with a strong anti-Russian sentiment. When he became a little bit older, a teenager, his brother was arrested for being involved in on the fringes, but on the plot on the life of the Russian Tsar Alexander III. This only strengthened Piłsudski's anti-Russian sentiment, and he quickly turned to what he considered to be the main vehicle for armed struggle against the Tsar, against the Russian state, and in extension for Polish sovereignty. By 1912, he had started creating so-called Związki Strzeleckie, or one Związek Strzelecki, that was given refuge in Austria-Hungary. From 1912, this is a place where they could officially start working together, forming this paramilitary group that was quite heavily based on previous scouting movements that had also sprung up like mushrooms after rain. This movement, it fostered the cadre, you could say, that later would join Piłsudski in his struggle during the First World War. And when the war did broke out, Piłsudski was of the belief that the way for Poland to regain its independence would be for the Central Powers, meaning the German Empire and Austria-Hungary, to defeat the Russian Empire, and that then both Germany and Austria-Hungary would in turn be defeated by the Western powers. This was exactly what happened, but in 1914 this was a view that very few people had, so you could say that Piłsudski was a visionary in that regard. 1917 would be a year that the war was really turning. The Americans joined the fight in April as well. Initially they didn't arrive in Europe to any great numbers, but it did tilt the balance, and the Germans realized that they had one final shot to winning the war before too many of these Americans would land on the European continent. So at the start of 1918, they did their spring push, which initially looked promising, but in the end, the defenses were simply too strong, and it became, as typical during the First World War, a war of attrition in which both sides lost huge numbers of men, but really weren't that much of territorial gains to speak about. 1917 was also the year in which Russia was finally taken out from the war. You had first the February Revolution, and then followed later in October the second revolution by the Bolsheviks. After the first revolution, Kerensky's government had still tried to remain in the war and fulfill its allegiance against the Western allies. But the Bolsheviks, they decided that enough was enough, and there would be no further war. With the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, a huge area in Central Eastern Europe was now handed over to German administration. Basically all what is today Poland, Belarus, the Baltic states, Ukraine.
Adam, sorry, I'm just going to have to stop you there. As usual, the clock has defeated us, but we will pick it up next time. There we are. I've had to stop Adam almost in mid-sentence, but not quite on this occasion. Don't worry, if you join us next time on Poland Daily History, as we hope you will, we'll pick up the story. Until then, thank you for watching and look forward to seeing you next time on Poland Daily History.